Imagine the heaviest expectation you have ever had placed on your shoulders. Just, uh, just sit with that weight for a second.
That can be paralyzing.
Right. Maybe it was the pressure to succeed in a really demanding career, or the unspoken obligation to carry on some complex family legacy.
We all have our version of that.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
But now I want you to take that localized pressure and expand it, like expand it to a galactic scale.
That is a terrifying thought experiment.
Seriously, imagine waking up in cold sweats because your grandfather was literally the most infamous architect of suffering in recorded history. And you are terrified that your very genetics are a ticking time bomb.
You aren't just worried about failing at that point.
No, you are gripped by the paralyzing fear that you are biologically destined to become a monster.
It is a profound psychological horror. The idea that your own biology or your lineage has already authored your future before you have even had a chance to pick up the pen, it completely strips away the illusion of free will.
Which brings us to our mission for today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We're taking a really comprehensive look at the source text, Star Wars Junior Jedi Knights, Anakin's Quest by Rebecca Moesta. But our goal here isn't just to walk you through familiar space adventure.
No, we are extracting the dense underlying philosophical and psychological insights embedded right within this specific journey.
Exactly. We're going to explore the paralysis of predeterminism, the absolute necessity of confronting the darkest parts of our own subconscious, and the stark difference between holding the aesthetic of power versus possessing genuine systemic understanding.
Because the material uses a highly specific setting to isolate variables of human behavior by placing these characters in extreme environments.
Like the stone walls of the Academy on Yavin 4.
Right, or the hyperlethal swamps of Dagobah. The narrative strips away all that societal noise. It forces an immediate, inescapable confrontation with the self. And the dynamics we are going to dissect today apply just as much to navigating corporate hierarchies or family traumas as they do to navigating a swamp.
So to set the stage for you, we are focusing on 11-year-old Anakin Solo.
The grandson of Anakin Skywalker.
Darth Vader. Yeah. He is carrying this crushing legacy of the Skywalker bloodline. Alongside him is his closest confidant, Tahiri, and her background could not be more different.
I really couldn't.
Her foundational years were shaped by the brutal, pragmatic survivalism of the Sand People on Tatooine. She is 9 years old, and she doesn't have the luxury of existential dread, because her worldview was forged in a landscape where you either survive the day or you don't.
That contrast is the absolute engine of the early narrative. You have Anakin, who is drowning in this abstract, future-oriented anxiety about his cosmic destiny.
Always looking ahead.
Always. And then you have Tahiri, whose entire psychological framework is grounded in immediate material reality. She acts as a vital tether for him.
Which he needs.
Desperately. When someone is spiraling into the abyss of their own potential for ruin, they don't need another philosopher. They need someone who knows how to keep their feet on the solid ground.
And Anakin is absolutely spiraling right from the jump. When the text opens, he has just returned to the Jedi Academy. By all accounts, he should feel secure.
He is surrounded by peers in a fortified temple.
Right, but instead he is entirely consumed by restlessness. So he attempts to use the Force to locate the source of this pervasive dread. And that deliberate opening of his mind pulls him into this recurring nightmare that is just incredibly aggressive in its sensory details.
The specifics of the dream imagery are critical to understanding his internal state. It is not just a vague feeling of unease.
No, it's vivid.
It is a highly constructed, deeply symbolic projection of his deepest insecurities.
He envisions the Emperor, not as a concept, but as a visceral presence in the room.
Yeah.
He sees the sickly greenish-white face deeply corrupted by the dark side.
A literal ghost haunting his psyche.
Exactly. And the Emperor speaks to him, calling him my child. And then Vader steps out of the shadows. The auditory hallucination of that mechanical breathing is deafening to him.
Well, the sensory overload is intentional.
Vader throws a heavy, suffocating black cloak over Anakin's shoulders, and he attempts to force a dark helmet onto his head, effectively trying to crown him in his own legacy.
Notice the violation of agency in that imagery. The cloak is heavy, it is suffocating. It represents a legacy that Anakin feels is being forced upon him, not something he is actively choosing.
And the dialogue in this sequence.
It is the ultimate articulation of his terror. The Emperor tells him, you cannot resist your destiny. It will always be inside you.
Just bone-chilling.
This isn't just a fear of making bad choices. This is the fundamental fear that choice itself is an illusion.
And that fear is rooted in a very specific haunting rumor that has been eating away at him. He is carrying this narrative that before he was even born, a clone of the Emperor managed to touch his mother Leia.
The implication being that this touch somehow infected the unborn child with the dark side.
Yes, he is wrestling with the concept of spiritual or moral contamination.
It is a brilliant analog for the real-world concept of generational trauma or epigenetic inheritance. Anakin is terrified that he carries a corruption that predates his own existence.
Like his code is fundamentally compromised.
Exactly. If you genuinely believe that you are intrinsically flawed, that your baseline nature is bent toward destruction, every single action you take is viewed through a lens of intense suspicion.
In the dream, he actively tries to reject it. He tries to throw off the cloak, he tries to scream, but that classic nightmare paralysis sets in. No sound comes out.
We've all had that dream.
It's the worst. And the cloak itself becomes animated, wrapping around him and dragging him down into the dark until Tahiri physically shakes him awake. The environment of his own mind is actively hostile to him.
This touches on the psychological phenomenon of the self-fulfilling prophecy, but taken to a dangerous extreme. If a child is repeatedly told they are inherently bad, whether by a parent society or in Anakin's case by the ghosts of his own lineage, the friction of constantly fighting that label becomes exhausting.
It wears you down.
It does. There is a psychological tipping point where the individual might subconsciously surrender to the expectation simply to relieve the tension of fighting it. Anakin is terrified that his resistance is ultimately futile.
So he seeks out Master Luke Skywalker to try and find some kind of objective truth to anchor himself. And the atmosphere in Luke's office reflects the emotional temperature perfectly. It is freezing cold. Anakin is shivering, clinging to a cup of warm soup with R2-D2 nudging his knee.
It is a very vulnerable, very human posture for a kid who is supposedly dealing with these massive cosmic forces.
Right, he's just an 11-year-old boy.
It highlights the disparity between the mythic expectations placed upon him and his reality. He is looking to his uncle not just as a Jedi Master, but as a patriarch who might have the power to absolve him of this inherited guilt.
So Anakin confronts Luke directly about the rumor. He asks if his mother was touched by the Emperor, and Luke confirms it. He says, yes, a clone did touch her.
And Anakin immediately jumps to the absolute worst-case scenario.
He asks, what if the Emperor found a way to infect me with the dark side? He is literally asking if he is a carrier for a moral virus.
Luke attempts a cognitive reframing here. He doesn't deny the darkness of the Skywalker past, but he shifts the focus to the final act of Anakin Skywalker's life. He reminds young Anakin that Vader, in his dying moments, chose to reject the dark side and save his son.
He's trying to show him that choice matters.
Luke is trying to establish that ultimate agency overrides historical momentum.
But I find Anakin's reaction to this so revealing. Luke's reframing doesn't offer him an ounce of comfort. Anakin instantly bypasses the redemption and fixates entirely on the preceding decades of horror.
He refuses to let his grandfather off the hook.
Exactly. He essentially argues that one final good choice does not negate a lifetime of catastrophic mistakes. He tells Luke, I may be destined to make the same mistakes that he did. The margin for error in his mind is zero.
It is a profound observation from a child. He recognizes that retroactive redemption doesn't undo the collateral damage. He isn't satisfied with the idea that he might eventually do the right thing after causing immense suffering. He wants a guarantee that he won't cause the suffering in the first place.
But Luke's philosophy,
And the philosophy of the Jedi as a whole,
is that guarantees do not exist.
there is only the continuous agonizing responsibility of daily choice.
And that lack of a guarantee is just intolerable to Anakin in his current state. He asked Luke how he knew what was truly inside of him.
And Luke admits that his own master sent him into a cave on Dagobah.
A cave that acts as a pure reflection of the subconscious. And the moment Anakin hears this, he doesn't hesitate, he demands to go, he needs an external crucible. He is desperate for an environment to just strip away the ambiguity and give him a binary answer. Am I good or am I evil?
It is the search for an external locus of control. We see this constantly in human behavior. When the internal landscape is too chaotic or too ambiguous, we desperately seek an external authority to define us.
We just want someone to tell us the answer.
We want a test of certification, an algorithm, or in this case, a mystical cave, to definitively tell us who we are so we no longer have to bear the anxiety of figuring it out ourselves.
Ask yourselves, how often do we let our family history or our past mistakes dictate our future? How often do you desperately seek an external test to tell you who you really are? It is such a universal trap.
Absolutely.
Now, before they can even arrange this journey, Anakin gets a lesson that directly challenges his desire for rigid control. He and Tahiri are down by the riverbank with their instructor Tian. The setting is serene. There's this thick, rolling mist coming off the water.
It's a very peaceful environment.
Tian uses the Force to gather the mist, swirling it into a glowing halo around her torch. It is a delicate, beautiful manipulation of the environment.
Her lesson is essentially a masterclass in shifting from a paradigm of domination to a paradigm of integration. She tells them that mist has no top, no bottom, no edges. You cannot grasp it.
If you try to enforce your will upon it with rigidity, it dissipates.
Exactly. It is much harder to influence than a solid object because it requires you to surrender your desire to crush it into a specific mold.
When Anakin attempts it, he approaches it with the exact same rigid anxiety he applies to his destiny. He tries to push it, to pat it into a solid shape, and nothing happens.
He's trying to wrestle with the water vapor.
Tian has to explicitly instruct him to stop trying to hold it. He must flow with it, she says. So he finally relaxes his grip, he lets his mind become malleable, and he successfully forms the mist into the shape of a tree, and then into the Millennium Falcon.
It is a direct analog to Eastern philosophical concepts, particularly the Taoist principle of wu-wei, or non-action.
Which doesn't mean doing nothing right.
Right, it means acting in accordance with the natural flow of the system rather than forcing your ego upon it. When Anakin relaxes, he achieves his goal.
But the moment his concentration fractures, his anxiety violently reasserts itself. The mist instantly shifts from the shape of his ship into the laughing, shriveled face of the Emperor.
His fear overriding his focus.
The visual is so jarring that Anakin physically recoils and falls into the mud. It is a stark demonstration that the environment is highly responsive to his internal state. When he tries to control the system, it reflects his deepest fear.
The mist acts as a low-stakes preview of the cave on Dagobah. It demonstrates that the energy around him isn't inherently malicious. It is merely a conduit for whatever he projects into it.
The Emperor's face wasn't hiding in the mist waiting to attack him.
Anakin built the monster himself out of his own unresolved terror. If you grip your fears too tightly, you give them the architecture to manifest.
So while Anakin is grappling with these highly internal abstract lessons about flow and projection, the narrative introduces a character who completely shatters their preconceived notions of what power and mastery actually look like. They need a guide for this journey to Dagobah, and they're introduced to Master Ikrit.
Ikrit is a brilliant structural pivot in the text. He is the complete antithesis of the martial, imposing aesthetic that Anakin associates with the dark side, and frankly, that most people associate with authority.
If you are relying on visual heuristics to identify a powerful warrior, Ikrit breaks every single rule. He is a Kushiban,
A small white furry creature with floppy ears.
He looks for all intents and purposes like a harmless domestic pet. In fact, Anakin and Tahiri spent weeks thinking he was just a stray animal they found in the ruins. He literally travels by riding draped around Anakin's neck.
Yet he is a centuries-old master who trained directly under Yoda.
The reactions of the peripheral characters to Ikrit are highly instructive. When they board the supply shuttle, the lightning rod, to head to Dagobah, the pilot Peckham physically struggles to reconcile Ikrit's appearance with his title.
Peckham is a gritty, pragmatic old spacer.
He looks at this fluffy creature and bluntly says, "You just don't look much like a Jedi Master." Bigger, I guess, for starters. He is entirely reliant on superficial signifiers of strength.
Peckham's cognitive dissonance is a common societal trap. We frequently conflate physical intimidation, volume, or aesthetic aggression with actual competence or power.
But Ikrit doesn't become defensive or insulted.
No, he uses Peckham's assumption as an opportunity to dismantle the entire framework of how they perceive strength.
Ikrit shares a piece of his own history that perfectly illustrates this. He explains that on his home world, his people are agrarian. They're weavers and farmers. They're all small in stature. When a Jedi Master initially selected Ikrit for training his own community, mocked him.
They thought the idea was absurd.
They joked that he might be able to use a lightsaber to trim the silkweed crops. They just couldn't conceive of a power dynamic that wasn't based on physical dominance.
Which sets up the crucial turning point of his anecdote. A year into his training, he returns to his village, still carrying some of those internal doubts. And the village is suddenly besieged by a herd of Jinkra beasts.
These are apex predators, 3 meters tall, heavily clawed, capable of devastating the entire settlement in minutes.
The villagers react exactly how you would expect. They grab primitive physical tools, rakes, hoes, pitchforks. They prepare for a blunt force trauma engagement that they are mathematically guaranteed to lose.
But Ikrit intervenes. He climbs to a high vantage point and tells them to stand down. He faces a stampede of massive predators, entirely alone, armed with absolutely nothing but his mind.
I want to emphasize the tactical brilliance of what Ikrit does here. He doesn't attempt to use the Force to physically wrestle the beasts.
He doesn't try to lift them or crush them.
Right, because that would be an exertion of raw, brute power that might fail against such massive numbers. Instead, he utilizes psychological warfare rooted in deep empathy and an understanding of the creature's nature.
He projects a highly detailed illusion directly into the minds of the herd. Directly in front of them, he creates the image and the sensation of a massive roaring fire consuming the village. He knows these beasts possess a primal terror of fire.
And simultaneously,
He projects an illusion behind them far up in the mountains. The smell and sight of an enormous, unguarded feast.
it is the ultimate synthesis of deterrence and incentive. He didn't fight their momentum, he redirected it. By understanding the biological imperatives of his opponents, fear of fire, desire for food, he manipulated their reality to achieve a bloodless victory.
He saved the village without inflicting a single casualty.
It redefines the entire concept of mastery for Anakin. The dark side of the Vader legacy is entirely predicated on domination, fear, and crushing your enemies into submission.
Ikrit proves that absolute power doesn't require a black helmet or a red blade. True mastery is the ability to understand a complex system so thoroughly that you can alter its course with a subtle shift in perception.
However, recognizing that kind of subtle power requires a level of maturity and introspection. And the narrative immediately juxtaposes Ikrit's quiet mastery with a character who possesses absolutely none of those qualities.
We are introduced to a profound foil for Anakin. Let's talk about the stowaway.
Oh, well.
While they are prepping the lightning rod for departure, Anakin, Tahiri, and R2 are engaged in the grueling physical labor of loading cargo crates using the Force. They open the final crate, and instead of supplies, a teenager jumps out.
Uldir's entire existence in this narrative serves as a cautionary study in unearned confidence and superficial ambition.
He announces himself with zero humility. I am Uldir. I have decided to be a Jedi. He is a bit older, physically sturdy, from the planetary capital of Coruscant. His parents are fleet pilots, a job he dismisses as incredibly boring.
He has absorbed the mythology of the Jedi, the heroics, the status, the lightsabers.
And he has simply decided he wants to wear that uniform.
If Anakin is crippled by imposter syndrome, Uldir is the walking embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect. He is so utterly ignorant of the philosophical, spiritual, and grueling physical demands of the discipline that he assumes it must be simple.
He perceives only the external rewards and remains completely blind to the internal sacrifices required to achieve them.
It is the ultimate entitlement. He actually demands to be tested by Master Luke.
When they bring him to Luke's study, Luke explains the gravity of the path. He reaches out with his mind to probe Uldir's potential, searching for that baseline connection to the Force. And the result is a flatline.
Luke's assessment is definitive but compassionate. He states that while the Force resides in all living things, Uldir lacks the specific aptitude or sensitivity required to be trained. There is no answering resonance in his mind.
Now, a rational individual, when told by the undisputed master of a discipline that they lack the foundational talent for it, might experience a moment of recalibration.
No.
Uldir's ego instantly rejects the data. He turns bright red, clenches his fists, and insists, I will become a Jedi. Give me a chance. He believes that sheer stubbornness and a desire for glory can somehow override his fundamental lack of capability.
Luke makes a fascinating pedagogical choice here. Rather than ejecting Uldir entirely, he allows him to stay on a probationary basis under the strict condition that Uldir must perform menial chores.
Scrubbing floors and doing laundry.
Luke recognizes that Uldir cannot be taught the Force, but he desperately needs to be taught humility. The chores are the actual test.
But Uldir is incapable of recognizing the value of the mundane. When the crew leaves for Dagobah, Uldir decides he is above scrubbing floors. He stows away again, hiding in the cargo hold of the lightning rod.
He wants the adventure without doing the work.
And this entitlement immediately triggers a near-fatal crisis the moment they land in the swamps of Dagobah.
Dagobah is an environment that violently rejects arrogance. It is a hyper-lethal, densely interconnected ecosystem where a single misstep can be fatal.
Uldir, operating under the delusion that he is the protagonist of his own action, Holovid throws open an escape hatch without any reconnaissance and plunges directly into a pool of swamp muck.
He leaps before he looks, both metaphorically and literally.
He is instantly trapped up to his armpits in this stinking, viscous slime. The more he panics and thrashes, the deeper he sinks, and the commotion immediately attracts the local apex predator.
This sequence provides a brilliant comparative analysis of crisis management styles.
The creature that emerges is terrifying. It is a 10-meter-long, fur-covered swamp monster with a melon-sized head, 6 blind eyes, and enormous flat teeth. It looms over Uldir, exhaling algae-scented breath directly into his face.
And Uldir's response is pure, unthinking panic.
He starts grabbing handfuls of the only thing available, which is mushy algae, and hurling it at the monster's face while screaming.
Uldir's fight-or-flight response is completely degraded by his lack of training. He resorts to entirely ineffective, blunt force resistance. Contrast this with how the trained members of the party respond when they arrive on the scene.
It is a masterclass in varied problem-solving. Anakin arrives, assesses the situation, and realizes the monster isn't acting with malice. It is curious and hungry. Rather than attacking it, Anakin uses the Force to gather large clumps of floating algae from across the swamp.
He weaves them into a dense carpet of food
And gently guides the beast away.
Anakin uses a systemic approach. Much like Ikrit with the Jinkra beasts, Anakin understands the biological imperative of the threat and satisfies it, neutralizing the danger without escalating the violence.
Meanwhile, Tahiri is working on extracting Uldir. She finds a vine, realizes it is too short, and uses her precision with the Force to float the end of it directly into Uldir's hands.
But Uldir is trapped in the suction of the mud.
The kids and Ikrit pull, but they lack the physical mass to break the suction. That is when Peckham arrives, grabs the vine, and uses pure, unadulterated physical strength to wrench Uldir out of the muck.
The resolution of the crisis requires a synthesis of all available methodologies. Anakin provides the strategic redirection, Tahiri provides the technical precision, and Peckham provides the necessary blunt force.
It demonstrates that complex problems rarely have a single monolithic solution. Yet Uldir's reaction to his rescue proves his cognitive blind spot is entirely intact.
He cannot process his own vulnerability.
He drags himself onto the bank, covered in slime, and notices that Tahiri has cut her foot on a thorn during the rescue. Instead of gratitude, he feels a surge of judgmental superiority.
It's astounding.
He actually thinks to himself that if she is so great with the Force, she should have been able to protect her own feet. He concludes that he could do better. He nearly died because of his own incompetence, required a multidisciplinary team to save him, and his takeaway is that his rescuers are flawed.
It is a stunning display of defensive attribution. He cannot integrate the reality of his failure, so he projects flaws onto those who succeeded.
Ask yourself where you might be acting like Uldir, focusing on the uniform or the title of a role rather than doing the quiet foundational work required to actually master it. It is easy to mock Uldir, but it is a highly prevalent human defense mechanism.
When we are forced into an environment where our perceived competence is shattered, how often do we critique the methodology of the people bailing us out rather than examining our own hubris?
Uldir's absolute refusal to learn from the environment nearly costs him his life a second time as they begin their actual trek through the Dagobah swamp. Which brings us to a fascinating exploration of the ecosystem itself.
The swamp functions as a relentless, unforgiving teacher. Dagobah operates on a principle of radical interconnectedness. It is an environment devoid of malice, but utterly intolerant of ignorance.
The sensory data is overwhelming. The air is choked with mist, the smell of rot and aggressive blooming flora is suffocating, and the insect life is pervasive. Tahiri accidentally inhales a swarm of gnats.
But Ikrit uses this to teach a lesson in environmental integration.
He instructs Anakin and Tahiri to calm their minds and project a subtle boundary. They don't swat the bugs. They establish an invisible 10-centimeter mental perimeter that simply deters the insects.
They are learning to assert their space within a system without attempting to destroy the system. It is a sophisticated, low-energy expenditure model of survival.
Uldir, however, views the environment as something to be conquered.
He has to dominate it.
Ikrit allows each of the children to take a turn leading the group to hone their sensory awareness. Tahiri excels reading the terrain effortlessly. Anakin successfully navigates them around a hidden predator. Then Uldir takes the lead.
And immediately adopts this aggressive striding posture.
He criticizes the others for moving too slowly. But after only a few steps, Anakin and Tahiri both experience a visceral, sickening intuition. They physically tackle Uldir to stop his forward momentum.
And Uldir's immediate assumption is that they are sabotaging him out of jealousy. He accuses them of trying to undermine his leadership.
Ikrit steps forward and wordlessly demonstrates the reality of the situation. He takes a thick marsh reed and thrusts it into the seemingly empty air directly in front of Uldir. The reed is instantly silently sheared into pieces. Ikrit moves it a few inches away, and it is sliced to ribbons again.
It is the web of the butcher bug. The threads are virtually invisible, incredibly tensile and razor-sharp.
The insect relies on the blind forward momentum of larger creatures to do the work of slicing them into manageable pieces.
It is the ultimate metaphor for systemic risk. If you barrel forward with blind arrogance, ignoring the subtle indicators of the environment, you will inevitably walk into an invisible mechanism that will tear you apart.
Ikrit uses this moment to articulate a core philosophical tenet of their training. He explains that energy flows through everything. Killing a single insect alters the planet. A minor internal shift alters the universe.
They are moving through an intricate, highly reactive web where every action produces a cascading reaction.
Pure systems thinking.
In any complex structure, whether it is the ecology of a swamp, the economy of a planet, or the internal architecture of the human psyche, there are no isolated variables. You cannot interact with one component without vibrating the entire web.
Uldir's philosophy of guts and glory is a linear, isolated approach that is fundamentally incompatible with a highly networked reality.
And the group witnesses the brutal reality of this interconnected cycle almost immediately.
They take shelter from a torrential downpour beneath the sprawling roots of a massive tree. From this vantage point, they observe a bizarre interaction. A creature known as a spotlight sloth ambles into a clearing.
The biomechanics of this ecosystem are endlessly inventive.
The sloth pulls back a flap of leathery skin on its chest to reveal a bioluminescent patch. It focuses this beam of light onto a cluster of brightly colored mushrooms. The intense light causes the mushrooms to violently rupture, expelling clouds of spores that the sloth then consumes.
It is a perfectly calibrated, localized loop of energy exchange. But the loop expands instantly. The introduction of the apex predator shatters the momentary equilibrium.
A giant spider emerges. The scale is staggering. Its bulbous white abdomen is the size of a shuttlecraft cargo hold. It moves with eerie silence on long, articulated legs, completely ignoring the humans. It targets the sloth, deploys a stinger, paralyzes the creature instantly, and begins to consume it.
The reaction of the observers highlights their varying levels of psychological conditioning. Tahiri, who witnessed the brutal reality of the desert food chain on Tatooine, remains silent. She understands that this is simply the mechanics of survival.
Uldir, however, who has lived an entirely insulated, urbanized existence on Coruscant, gags audibly.
That single involuntary noise of disgust violates the rules of the system.
It alerts the spider to their presence. The predator pivots, releases a terrifying trumpeting sound, and begins to systematically dismantle the landscape to get to them. It rips up foliage tears at the moss and physically begins uprooting the massive tree the group is hiding beneath.
The ensuing chase forces every member of the party to utilize their specific capabilities. It is a high-stakes stress test.
They scramble out from the collapsing root system. R2-D2 gets briefly wedged, requiring a coordinated shove to free him just as the tree comes crashing down. The spider pursues them relentlessly. It zeroes in on the droid and brings its stinger down for a strike.
But R2 proves that even the mechanical components of this group possess a survival instinct.
He deploys a grasper arm, clamps onto the descending stinger, and emits a shrieking electronic distress siren at maximum volume.
The auditory assault startles the spider sufficiently to break its focus. It recoils, throws what can only be described as a primal temper tantrum, shredding the remains of the fallen tree.
And then it engages in an action that radically alters Anakin's understanding of the natural order.
This is the moment of paradigm shift.
Once its fury subsides, the giant spider climbs onto the mound of exposed earth where the tree had stood. It settles its massive body into the dirt, drives its stinger deep into the soil, and rigidifies its legs. Anakin watches horrified, and then realizes the structural similarity.
The dark, gnarled, spidery roots of the massive tree surrounding them are identical in shape to the spider's legs.
Ikrit confirms the revelation. Every single one of these ancient towering trees is the final stage of the giant spider's life cycle.
It is a breathtaking biological metamorphosis. The apex predator of the environment physically roots itself, calcifies, and transforms into the foundational flora of the ecosystem.
The creature that brings violent death ultimately becomes the structure that provides shelter, retains the soil, and fosters the growth of the mushrooms that will feed the next cycle of life.
It fundamentally dismantles the concept of evil within a natural system. Anakin has been operating under this rigid binary where darkness, death, and decay are malicious anomalies that must be eradicated.
Dagobah forces him to see that death and decay are the necessary engines of new life. The spider isn't a villain. It is an essential gear in the mechanism of the planet.
This realization is the crucial prerequisite for Anakin's ultimate test. If he enters the cave still believing that darkness is an external, unnatural infection, the cave will destroy him. He has to understand that darkness is an intrinsic, neutral component of the whole.
Having survived the physical trials of the swamp, they finally arrive at the nexus of the journey, the legendary cave.
And much like Ikrit, the physical reality of the cave aggressively subverts expectations.
It isn't a grand crystalline cavern. It is a dark, muddy hole nestled beneath the spidery roots of another transformed predator tree. It smells of decay and damp earth.
Uldir is immediately dismissive.
He declares that it looks no different than the hole they hid in earlier, asserting that the stories must be an exaggerated hoax.
Ikrit establishes the singularly terrifying parameter of the crucible. He tells them they must enter one at a time, warning them the cave holds only what you take in with you.
It is the ultimate inescapable mirror.
You cannot fight the environment because the environment is you.
Uldir, driven by his relentless need to prove his superiority, insists on going first. He drops down into the darkness, activates a glow rod, and begins to explore. He hits his head on the low ceiling, immediately becoming frustrated.
He registers the physical details, the uneven floor, the roots.
He notices that the air has a spoiled, oily taste that coats his tongue, and he feels a pressing sense of profound emptiness. After a few minutes, he grows bored, turns around, and climbs back out. He triumphantly announces to the group that the cave is a complete fraud. It is empty.
Ikrit's response is a devastatingly precise psychological diagnosis. He looks at Uldir and says, "No, you are right. For you, the cave holds nothing."
Uldir experiences this as a victory, but it is the ultimate failure. Why does the cave reject him?
Because the cave is a reflective surface and Uldir lacks an internal landscape to project. He possesses no introspection, no profound fears, no complex identity.
His entire persona is constructed of borrowed aesthetics and unearned entitlement.
When he stepped into an environment designed to manifest his subconscious, the environment produced exactly what was there, an oily, spoiled emptiness. He confronted his own hollowness and lacked the awareness to even recognize it.
It is chilling. The horror of the Hollow Man.
Tahiri goes next.
She doesn't let Uldir's dismissal deter her. She squeezes Anakin's hand, descends into the dark, and her experience is an immediate, violent contrast to Uldir's.
The cave instantly recalibrates to reflect her specific psychological needs.
The damp chill of the swamp vanishes. She is hit by a furnace blast of arid wind. She tastes dry grit and feels loose sand shifting beneath her boots. The darkness is replaced by swirling, holographic manifestations of her deepest foundational memories.
She sees the culture that raised her, the sand people on their banthas.
She sees the rudimentary moisture farms, and then she sees a man and a woman. She intuitively recognizes them as the parents she lost before she could form conscious memories.
The vision is serving a highly specific therapeutic function. Tahiri is an individual profoundly untethered. She was orphaned, raised by an alien culture, and is now living among Jedi on a jungle moon. She is a collection of disparate, disconnected experiences.
The cave is offering her an anchor.
The vision shifts further backward in time. She sees a man with blonde hair and striking green eyes carrying a lightsaber. She knows instantly that this is her grandfather.
She watches as he is pursued by Imperial stormtroopers. Instead of fleeing, he turns, deliberately placing himself between the blaster fire and the infant version of Tahiri. A red bolt strikes him and the vision violently ends. She wakes up on the moss outside the cave.
We must analyze the structural impact of that specific sequence on her psyche. Before this moment, her origin story was essentially one of abandonment. The universe had haphazardly discarded her.
The cave reframes her entire existence.
It reveals that her survival wasn't an accident. It was the result of a deliberate sacrificial act of immense love. It shifts her internal narrative from "I am abandoned" to "I am protected." She inherits a legacy of courage.
She emerges fundamentally grounded, possessing a coherent narrative of self. The physical proof of her immersion is that when she emerges, her hair, which had been soaked by the swamp rain, is completely bone dry, baked by the phantom sun of Tatooine. She has found her center.
And now the narrative arrives at the crucible we have been building toward.
It is Anakin's turn to face the dark. He steps into the cave, and the environment responds to the massive polarized tension within his psyche. The reality of the cave literally bifurcates.
It is an incredibly striking visual.
The space around him splits down the middle. On his right, the air grows warm, illuminated by a soft, clear light resembling a perfect sunrise. On his left, the environment rapidly degrades into a freezing, violent storm. Lightning strobes through the darkness.
He holds up his hands to examine the physics of the space. One hand is warm and bathed in light, the other is numb with cold and slick with freezing rain.
It is the spatial manifestation of his internal binary. He has segregated his potential into two irreconcilable extremes.
In the storm-ravaged half of the cave, a figure materializes. The glossy black helmet, the sweeping cape, the agonizing mechanical breath. Darth Vader.
Anakin is instantly paralyzed by the familiar terror. But before the nightmare can fully take hold, a second figure appears in the tranquil sunlit half. A man in a simple brown robe carrying a lightsaber projecting calm authority, the archetypal Jedi Master.
He is observing the ultimate externalization of his conflict. Ultimate evil and ultimate good standing in direct opposition.
The dark figure initiates the conflict. Vader raises a hand, and jagged arcs of blue force lightning erupt across the divide, striking the Jedi Master. The Master raises a barrier to absorb the energy, but pointedly refuses to launch a counterattack.
Anakin is caught in the middle, watching this elemental war trembling under the weight of the spectacle.
And then something breaks within him. He rejects the role of passive observer.
This is the moment of crucial psychological intervention.
He lunges forward, physically throwing his small body across the divide, placing himself directly between the torrent of lightning and the Jedi Master. He throws up his arms, screaming, "No, I won't let you."
And what is the immediate consequence of that assertion of agency?
The violence instantly ceases. The lightning dissipates. Both figures lower their arms. They turn in unison, moving out of the shadows and the blinding light, and they look down at him. As the visual distortion clears, Anakin looks into their faces and realizes they are identical. Both the dark figure and the light figure possess his exact face.
This sequence is a staggering exploration of Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. Jung theorized that the conscious ego actively represses aspects of the personality that it deems unacceptable, dangerous, or shameful, forming the shadow.
We typically project this shadow onto external enemies.
Anakin has spent his entire life projecting his shadow onto the historical figure of his grandfather and the rumor of the Emperor's curse. He believed his capacity for destruction was an external parasite. But the cave forces the integration of the self. By showing him that both the ultimate tyrant and the ultimate savior wear his face, it shatters the illusion of external determinism. Exactly. It forces him to accept that the potential for catastrophic evil is not a curse. It is simply a component of his human architecture. It is terrifying because it means he is capable of being Vader. But it is profoundly liberating because it means he is equally capable of being the Master.
The battle he was watching wasn't a historical reenactment. It was the daily agonizing mechanics of his own free will. He isn't a victim of a cosmic war. He is the battlefield itself.
When you externalize the source of your darkness, you simultaneously externalize your power to control it. By looking at both the tyrant and the saint and saying, "These are both me," Anakin reclaims absolute agency over his future.
Bring this back to your own internal battles for a second. We often externalize our demons, blaming our circumstances or genetics. How terrifying but also empowering is it to realize that both your greatest hero and your worst villain are simply you?
It is a monumental paradigm shift.
He emerges from the caves, and the oppressive, suffocating anxiety that has defined his existence has evaporated. He doesn't have a guarantee that he won't make mistakes. The cave didn't give him a certificate of purity, but he is no longer afraid of the question.
The group congregates around a small fire outside the cave to process the experience. The varying reactions perfectly encapsulate the differing trajectories of the characters.
Tahiri is quiet, anchored by her vision, resting comfortably. Uldir is still complaining bitterly, maintaining the illusion that the cave was a pointless hole in the ground. And Anakin turns to Ikrit, seeking a final synthesis of everything they have endured.
Ikrit delivers a profound articulation of existential philosophy. He tells them your learning and heritage mold you. No one is either entirely good or bad. We each hold the shadow of darkness and the flame of light. Our destinies are not set, and life offers no guarantees. It is the choices that you make that will determine what you become.
And then he directly addresses Anakin's deepest fear regarding the Emperor's rumor.
He says, the Emperor cannot reach out to you from beyond the grave, but neither can those you love make your choices for you.
It is the ultimate rejection of predeterminism. Ikrit isn't dismissing the reality of genetics or trauma. The heritage molds you. It provides the raw materials. But the raw materials do not dictate the architecture of the building. The daily conscious choices determine the structure.
You cannot blame the ghost of the Emperor if you fail, but you also cannot rely on the ghost of your grandfather to save you. The responsibility is absolute, and it is entirely yours.
Before they depart, Dagobah Ikrit facilitates one final, deeply poignant moment that reinforces the necessity of emotional integration. He leads them to a small, decaying mud hut, heavily overgrown with moss and infested with swamp life.
Uldir, remaining completely superficial, scoffs at the structure, dismissing it as insignificant.
Ikrit gently corrects him, revealing that this unassuming ruin was the final home of Yoda, one of the most powerful beings to ever exist. Ikrit sits amidst the decay and begins to speak about his old master. He recounts Yoda's centuries of service, his profound wisdom, and the ultimate tragedy of his forced exile.
As Ikrit processes this grief, a remarkable biological reaction occurs.
The children watch in awe as Ikrit's snowy white fur begins to shift. It turns a dull gray, and as his mourning deepens, the color continues to darken until his entire coat is pitch black. He possesses the biological capacity to alter his pigmentation, not just for camouflage, but as a visceral physical manifestation of emotional pain.
It serves as a beautiful counterpoint to everything Anakin previously believed about power. The dark side teaches that painful emotions, fear, anger, or grief must be weaponized or aggressively suppressed. The Jedi, often misinterpreted, are thought to lack emotion entirely.
Ikrit demonstrates that true mastery involves experiencing grief so profoundly that it physically alters you, allowing that emotion to exist without letting it consume your moral center.
He feels the pain, fully expresses it, and then allows his fur to return to white. It is the perfect model of emotional processing.
The journey back to Yavin 4 and their subsequent behavior upon arrival serves as the final definitive proof of who actually absorbed the lessons of the swamp.
We see the actual application of the knowledge.
On the cramped flight home, Peckham is miserable. Uldir is still posturing, but Tahiri is in a state of absolute bliss. She takes off her boots, completely unbothered by the bandage on her foot from her swamp injury. She's comfortable in her own skin, deeply rooted in her newfound sense of belonging.
And when they finally arrive back at the academy, the contrast between Anakin and Uldir is staggering.
You would think that having survived giant predators, butcher bugs, and a confrontation with his own soul, Anakin would demand immediate advancement. You'd think he'd march into Luke's office and demand a lightsaber. But that is what Uldir would do.
Instead, we find Anakin and Tahiri down in the cargo bay of the lightning rod.
They have buckets of river water, and they are on their hands and knees scrubbing the caked swamp mud off the deck plates.
It perfectly embodies the Zen proverb. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The physical reality of the universe hasn't changed. The ship is still dirty. The chores still need doing.
What has changed is Anakin's internal relationship to the reality. He is performing menial labor with a profound sense of peace. He is no longer trying to control the mist. He is flowing with the work.
Uldir, meanwhile, sloshes water around, complaining. He asks if they think he'll ever be a Jedi.
Anakin and Tahiri offer to help him study, showing him genuine grace. But Uldir isn't listening. He decides internally that the real solution is to bypass the work entirely. He resolves to immediately acquire Jedi robes and a utility belt.
He believes that if he adopts the aesthetic of mastery, the universe will simply hand him the status. He went into the cave empty, and he returned empty.
The deep dive into this narrative reveals that the true journey was never about surviving the external hazards of Dagobah. It was about surviving the internal hazards of the ego.
So as we synthesize this immense journey, the takeaways are remarkably clear, even if the application is incredibly difficult.
Tian's Mist teaches us that attempting to rigidly control complex systems, including our own anxiety, only gives shape to our fears. You have to learn to flow.
The ecosystem of Dagobah demonstrates the reality of systems thinking. Every action is connected in a vast neutral web, and recognizing that darkness and decay are natural components of the cycle is essential to dismantling our binary fears.
And the cave. The cave is the ultimate realization that you are the author of your own duality. The potential for the deepest cruelty and the highest heroism exists in the exact same space within you. You are not a victim of your legacy.
The blueprint is inherited, but you are the builder.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to carry with you. If you were to walk down into the damp earth beneath those spidery roots today, stepping to a space that strips away every excuse, every externalization, and reflects only the raw truth of what you brought in, what are you most afraid you would see standing in the dark?
And more importantly,
if you saw two versions of yourself locked in combat, which one are you actively choosing to step in front of today?
the responsibility is entirely yours.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning your sources, keep exploring your own reflections, and we will see you next time.